This is exactly what the name implies, a crash course on the quadratic formula. So if you are going to use the quadratic formula, the first thing you have to do is to get your quadratic equation into standard form. And remember, standard form is some number in front of your x squared plus some number in front of your x plus a plain old number. Okay, then you need to figure out what your a, b, and c is. And that you just look at your standard form. Okay. And then you're just going to get your zeros or your solutions by plugging in a, b, and c to the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula, right? Quadratic formula. All right. So if we are getting our solutions, we're solving for where does the parabola cross the x-axis. So your quadratic formula looks like this. Okay. So your solutions are going to be negative b, remember b from your standard form right here, negative b plus or minus. So you're going to go negative b plus the square root of all of this divided by 2a, and then you'll do it again, negative b minus the square root of all of this divided by 2a, so that you'll come up with two answers in most cases. Sometimes not, but most of the time you will. Remember, we have talked about the fact that a parabola can hit the x-axis twice. So there are two solutions in this case. A parabola can hit the x-axis just one time. So there's one solution. And in some cases, a parabola will not hit the x-axis at all, and so there are no solutions. There is a part of the quadratic equation, remember, the quadratic equation is this whole thing up here. There is a part of it that is known as the discriminant, okay? And it is the part under the radical, okay? So the discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac, okay? And the discriminant is important because it's going to tell you kind of how much work you still have to do or whether it's even worth going on. If the discriminant, when you put b and a and c in here, when you put all of that in there, if the discriminant is positive, there will be two solutions. If the discriminant is negative, there will be no solutions at all. Why? Because if b squared minus 4ac, if all of that gives you a negative number, you can't take the square root of a negative number. You don't get a real number if you try to take the square root of a negative. So if b squared minus 4ac is negative, you have no solutions. Okay? And then if b squared is 0, then you're going to have one solution. meaning that the parabola only touches the x-axis at one spot. Okay? So in some cases that can kind of be a shortcut to figure out whether you need to carry out the entire quadratic formula or not. But your quadratic formula, which is up here, don't worry, you do not have to memorize it. It is on your formula sheet. It's right here towards the bottom. Okay. Basically, the quadratic formula gives you a fail-safe way of figuring out what your zeros or what your solutions are to a quadratic equation. Okay, like I said, you can have two solutions, you might have no solutions, you might only have one solution. A lot of times we can take a quadratic equation and factor it, and we've done that. But sometimes they're very difficult to factor, or they just won't factor smoothly because maybe we get a decimal, or maybe we get, times the square root of whatever. And so the quadratic formula is your, when all else fails, figure out your solutions with the quadratic formula. Okay, so I think we're just going to dive in and we're going to do some examples. So if you'll join me on the next page.